I'm Jack, 35 years old, and I always thought that I had a solid relationship with my wife, Rachel. She's 33, smart, beautiful, and she's the kind of person who can light up a room without even trying. At least, that's how I used to see her. I guess the cracks had been there for a while now. Maybe I'd just been too comfortable, or maybe I didn't want to admit that the person I loved could do something like this. It was a Thursday night, the kind where you just want to kick back and relax. Work had been a grind, and I wasn't really in the mood to be around people. Rachel had mentioned earlier that she was meeting up with her friends at this trendy bar downtown, so I thought I'd have the night to myself. But after an hour or so, the walls were closing in on me at home. I decided to grab a drink at the same place. Not to spy on her, just to get out of the house. I didn't expect to see or hear anything out of the ordinary. I walked into the bar, keeping my distance from the crowd. The music was loud, people were laughing and drinking, but my eyes were drawn to the corner where Rachel was sitting with her friends, Amy and Vanessa. They hadn't noticed me yet, and I wasn't about to make a scene. I ordered a drink and kept to myself, trying to stay out of their line of sight. I didn't want to interrupt, but I could feel the vibe around them was a little off. They were huddled close, leaning in like they were discussing something they didn't want the rest of the world to hear. That's when it happened. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help it. I overheard Amy, Rachel's best friend, say something that froze me in place. She leaned in closer to Rachel, lowering her voice just enough that it blended with the background noise. But I caught it. So, when are you going to go through with it? You know, make him jealous enough to lose his mind. Rachel let out this soft laugh. The kind that used to make me feel like I was lucky to have her. Now, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I don't know, maybe next week, Rachel replied casually, like they were planning a shopping trip. I've been thinking about it, though. If Jack doesn't start giving me some attention soon, he's going to find out what it feels like to be on the losing side. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own wife, plotting to make me jealous by messing around with another man. The woman I thought I knew was sitting just a few feet away, scheming with her friends like it was some high school prank. Part of me wanted to walk over there and confront her right then and there, but something held me back. Maybe it was shock, maybe it was disbelief. But I just stood there, my drink in hand, pretending not to hear every word that was cutting into me. Amy was the one pushing it, her eyes gleaming like this was some exciting game. Okay, but you can't just do it halfway, Rachel. You need to pick someone who'll get under Jack's skin. Like, really mess with him. Who's it gonna be? You can't just pick any random guy. Rachel tilted her head, thinking for a second. I was actually thinking about Tom. Tom, our neighbor. The guy who's been flirting with her at every neighborhood barbecue for the last year. He's good looking, sure, in that smug, self-assured way that made me want to punch him every time he smiled at her. I never thought Rachel would actually be interested in him, though. I always brushed it off as harmless. But now, knowing that she was considering using him as a pawn to get to me. It was like someone had lit a fire in my chest. Tom, Vanessa chimed in. You really think that'll get to Jack? I mean, the guy's been trying to charm his way into every woman's pants for years. If he even thinks he has a chance with you, he'll go all out. Rachel shrugged. Exactly. Jack's been distant, wrapped up in his own world for months now. If he sees me with Tom, maybe he'll wake up and realize what he's about to lose. Her voice was so casual, so detached, like this wasn't about our marriage but some petty game. I wanted to scream, to march over and demand she explain herself, but instead, I stayed still, letting the anger build. They kept talking, making plans like this was some kind of twisted strategy session. So, Amy asked, what's the plan, then? Dinner at his place. Drinks. Rachel smiled, that same smile I used to love. Now it made me sick. I'll start slow. Maybe we'll, accidentally, bump into each other at the gym or grab a coffee. Something innocent at first, but I'll make sure Jack sees it. I'll drop little hints, make him start wondering. And then, Vanessa pressed. And then, Rachel said, her voice lowering to a sultry whisper, I'll let him think whatever he wants. Maybe I'll even let Jack catch me at Tom's place one night. Nothing too obvious, just enough to drive him crazy. They all laughed. It was lighthearted for them, just a fun little conspiracy. But for me, it was like watching everything I thought I knew crumble in front of me. I finished my drink in one long swallow, the taste bitter on my tongue. I walked out of that bar feeling like the ground had just shifted beneath me. Rachel and her friends had no idea I'd been there, no clue that I'd heard every disgusting word. A part of me felt sick. How had our relationship come to this? I wasn't perfect, sure. I'd been busy with work, stressed, maybe a little distant, but I never thought she'd go to these lengths. She wasn't just planning to hurt me. She was plotting to humiliate me. But the more I thought about it, the anger that had been bubbling inside me since I overheard them morphed into something sharper, more focused. I couldn't let her get away with this. She thought she could play with me, toy with my emotions, and use some other guy to manipulate me into crawling back to her feet. No, that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to react like some jealous, desperate husband chasing after her. She wanted to break me. Fine, but I wasn't going to break the way she expected. I spent the next few days replaying every word I overheard, crafting my own plan, something that would turn the tables on her so perfectly, so completely, that she wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about showing her that I wasn't some clueless guy she could jerk around. I was going to outsmart her at her own game. But to do that, I had to be careful. I couldn't let my anger get in the way. I had to stay calm, composed, and, most importantly, patient. The first thing I did was lean into her game. She was expecting me to notice her little hints, to get suspicious and jealous when she started making her moves with Tom. So, I decided to play along. Over the next few days, I acted like I didn't have a clue. I made sure to keep my usual routines, stay busy with work, and even acted a little more distant, just enough to make her think her plan was working. I gave her no reason to suspect that I knew anything. But behind the scenes, I started setting up my own trap. I knew Rachel would eventually try to push things further with Tom, so I made it a point to keep a close eye on them without tipping her off. I noticed that she started going to the gym at odd times, the same times I knew Tom was there. She'd come home smiling more, laughing at her phone like some inside joke was playing out between them. It was nauseating, but I had to stay focused. I couldn't react too soon. Timing was everything. To really get under her skin, I needed to make sure she believed she was in control, that her little plan was playing out exactly how she wanted. I even started dropping a few comments about being busy with work or feeling exhausted, just to reinforce the idea that she had me where she wanted me, distracted and disconnected. But all the while, I was laying the groundwork for what would come next. The key to my revenge was information, and luckily, I had a friend who worked in IT. I reached out to him one evening, after making up an excuse to Rachel about having to work late. "Mike," I said, keeping my voice steady even though I was boiling inside, "I need a favor, and I need you to keep this between us." He knew something was up, but he didn't ask too many questions. That's the thing about Mike, he was loyal and sharp. If I needed something done, he could do it without blinking. I asked him to help me set up some, let's call them, surveillance measures. Nothing illegal, of course, just a way to monitor Rachel's texts and emails without her knowing. If she was going to try to play me, I needed every piece of evidence I could get. "Are you sure about this?" Mike asked, giving me a hard look over the phone. "Once you open this door, there's no going back, Jack." "I'm sure," I said, my voice cold. "I need to know." Within a day, Mike had everything set up. I could see who Rachel was texting, what she was saying, and to whom. And just like I expected, she had started texting Tom, making small talk at first, but soon it turned into something more flirty. I watched as they made plans to meet, casually, at the gym, then for coffee afterward. The messages were tame enough, but I knew where they were leading. Rachel was laying the groundwork to escalate things with Tom, just like she'd said she would. Now, the question was, when would she take the next step? And how far was she willing to go? The opportunity to strike came sooner than I thought. About a week after I overheard her in the bar, Rachel told me she was meeting up with her friends for another girls' night. But I knew better. I checked her messages with Tom, and sure enough, they'd planned to meet up at his place after she left her friends. This was it, the moment she thought she was about to pull the rug out from under me. But I wasn't going to let her get that far. The next part of my plan was risky, but I needed it to work perfectly. I made a quick phone call to an old acquaintance, someone I'd helped out in the past with some business connections. Let's just say he owed me a favor. Can you get a recording crew? I asked. Discreet, but professional. I need them outside a house at a specific time. No questions asked. He agreed, and with that, the pieces were in place. That night, as Rachel got dressed and told me she was heading out to meet Amy and Vanessa, I played the part of the clueless husband. Have fun, I said, barely looking up from the TV. Inside, though, I was seething. She smiled at me, kissed me on the cheek like everything was normal, and walked out the door. I waited until she was gone, then grabbed my phone and headed out. I parked a few streets down from Tom's place, where my hired crew was already set up in an unmarked van. They'd have the perfect angle of Rachel arriving at Tom's door, and they'd record every second of it. But I wasn't done. I had one last card to play, something that would turn this whole situation on its head. I pulled out my phone and sent a text message to Rachel's group chat with Amy and Vanessa, pretending to be Rachel. I'm heading to Tom's now. Wish me luck, ladies. Tonight's the night I teach Jack a lesson. Then I waited. I sat in my car, the engine off, waiting in the dark while the minutes ticked by. Rachel thought she was in control, but little did she know, the noose was tightening. I watched the screen of my phone, waiting for any sign that things were unfolding as I'd planned. The camera crew was discreet, already positioned and ready to capture everything. I knew exactly what time Rachel was supposed to arrive at Tom's place. She'd texted him that she'd be there around 9 p.m. At 8:57, I saw headlights in the distance. Her car. I clenched my fists, keeping my emotions in check. This wasn't the time to lose my cool. As she pulled up and parked a few houses down from Tom's place, she got out of the car, looking casual but definitely dressed to impress. She'd gone all out to make herself look irresistible tonight. Her hair was styled just the way she knew Tom liked it, and she was wearing that little black dress I'd bought for her a few months back, the one I thought she wore for me. My stomach churned, but I pushed the feeling down. This was all part of her plan, and now it was part of mine. Rachel took a quick glance around, like she was making sure no one was watching, then walked toward Tom's front door. I kept a safe distance, just close enough to catch every detail, but far enough that she wouldn't notice me if she happened to glance back. As soon as she reached his porch and rang the doorbell, I snapped a few photos on my phone for extra evidence. The camera crew was already rolling. The door opened, and there he was. Tom, the smug bastard, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. He let her inside, and the door closed behind them. This was it. Rachel thought she had me right where she wanted me. Little did she know, the real game was about to begin. I watched the clock. I gave it about 20 minutes, just enough time for her to get comfortable, for things to start heating up between her and Tom. Meanwhile, I was carefully orchestrating the next phase of my revenge. I wasn't just going to let her think she could get away with this. I needed to hit her where it hurt. I texted Amy, Rachel's best friend, knowing she was at home. I made it look like I'd accidentally sent her a text that was meant for someone else, just caught Rachel heading to Tom's place. Looks like tonight's the night. Guess I'll be packing my bags. I knew exactly what would happen next. Amy, being the drama queen she is, would panic and call Rachel. She wouldn't be able to help herself. She'd blow up Rachel's phone the second she saw that message, and in doing so, she'd disrupt whatever plan Rachel had in mind for Tom. Sure enough, within minutes, Rachel's phone started buzzing. I could see the glow of her screen through the window, and she quickly picked it up. I could only imagine the look on her face when she saw Amy's name pop up. And that's when things started to spiral out of control. Rachel stepped away from Tom, her expression shifting from flirtatious to panicked as she read Amy's texts. I couldn't hear what was going on, but from my vantage point, it was obvious that the mood in the room had changed. She was trying to text Amy back, probably assuring her that everything was fine, that she wasn't actually going through with the plan yet. But it was too late. The seed had been planted, and Rachel was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as slick as she thought. I waited a few more minutes, watching from the shadows as Rachel grew more anxious. Tom seemed confused, probably wondering why she was suddenly distracted, but I didn't care about him. He was just a pawn in this. Rachel was the one I wanted to break. It was time for my next move. I texted Rachel directly, and this time, I didn't hold back. I know where you are. I know what you're doing. Don't even bother trying to deny it. A minute passed, then another. I could see her fumbling with her phone, typing and deleting, unsure of how to respond. Finally, my phone lit up with her reply. Jack, it's not what you think. I cut her off with another text before she could finish. Spare me the excuses, Rachel. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. I didn't wait for her to respond. Instead, I walked back to my car and drove off, leaving her to stew in her panic. I didn't need to stick around for the rest. The damage was done. I had all the evidence I needed. The photos, the messages, the footage, and I knew Rachel was scrambling, trying to figure out how she could salvage this situation. But there was no salvaging it. She had underestimated me, and now she was paying the price. When I got home, I took a deep breath and started packing a suitcase. Not because I was actually leaving, but because I wanted her to think I was. I wanted her to come home to an empty house, to see the suitcase by the door, and to feel the weight of her betrayal pressing down on her. I wasn't done with her yet, but this was part of the game. She needed to feel the consequences of what she'd done before I delivered the final blow. Just as I expected, about an hour later, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Rachel was calling, texting, begging for me to pick up. I ignored every single one. I let her sit in her own fear, imagining the worst. Finally, when I couldn't resist anymore, I answered one of her frantic calls. Jack, please, listen to me, she said, her voice trembling. It's not what it looks like. I can explain everything. I stayed silent for a long moment, letting the tension build. Then I spoke, my voice cold and detached. I don't want your excuses, Rachel. You played your little game, and now it's over. I'll be gone by the time you get home. She started crying then, trying to sputter out some kind of explanation, but I cut her off. Save it. I know about Tom. I know about everything. You thought you could manipulate me. Well, congratulations, you just lost everything. I hung up before she could respond. When I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The storm had finally passed, and now all that was left was to watch the aftermath unfold. I had pulled the rug out from under Rachel, and she was scrambling to regain her footing. But there was no going back now. She'd crossed the line, and I'd made sure she knew it. I didn't go anywhere that night, despite what I'd told her. I wanted to see her face when she came home, desperate and panicked, thinking she had ruined everything. I could imagine her speeding back, heart racing, mind spinning as she tried to come up with a way to fix this. But there was nothing left to fix. She had orchestrated her own downfall, and now she was going to face the consequences. Around midnight, I heard her car pull into the driveway. I sat on the couch, still and quiet, waiting for the sound of the door opening. When it did, Rachel rushed in, her eyes wide and red from crying, her breath ragged. She stopped when she saw me sitting there, suitcase by my side, looking calm, composed, and completely uninterested in whatever she had to say. Jack. Her voice was barely a whisper. Please, just let me explain. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just stared at her, letting the silence do its work. She was visibly trembling, her hands wringing together as she stepped closer. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear that she had lost me for good. But the truth was, she had lost me long before that night. There's nothing to explain, Rachel, I said, my voice cold and emotionless. I know everything. I know about the plan, about Tom, about how you thought you could make me jealous and win me back. But here's the thing, you lost me the moment you decided to betray my trust. And now, there's no coming back from that. Her eyes filled with tears again, and she took another step forward, her voice shaking. Jack, it wasn't supposed to go this far. I was hurt. I felt like you didn't care about me anymore, like you were too focused on everything else but us. I thought if I could make you jealous, maybe you'd want me again. I shook my head, my expression hard. So your solution was to cheat on me. To humiliate me. To try and manipulate me into begging for your attention. That's not how this works, Rachel. That's not love. That's control. And I'm done letting you control me. She broke down then, collapsing onto the floor in front of me, sobbing uncontrollably. It was a pathetic sight, This woman I had once loved, reduced to a desperate mess, trying to pick up the pieces of a game she had started and lost. But there was no sympathy left in me. I had given her everything, my time, my love, my loyalty, and she had thrown it all away for a twisted, self-serving plan. "I'm sorry," she choked out, her voice muffled by her tears. "I'm so sorry, Jack. I never meant for this to happen. I love you. I do. I didn't know how else to get your attention." I stood up, slowly, towering over her as she knelt on the floor, broken. "You got my attention, all right," I said quietly. "But it wasn't the way you wanted." I picked up the suitcase and made my way to the door. Rachel scrambled to her feet, reaching out for me, but I pulled away, not letting her touch me. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small and terrified. "To a hotel," I said simply. "I need space. And frankly, I don't think I want to be around you right now." She tried to follow me, pleading, but I turned to face her one last time. "Don't call me. Don't text me. I need time to think, and you need time to reflect on what you've done. If you really loved me, Rachel, you wouldn't have done this. But now, you'll have to live with the consequences." I walked out, leaving her standing in the doorway, crying softly into the night. I didn't look back, didn't let myself feel anything but the satisfaction of knowing I had turned the tables on her. She thought she could play me, but I had played her instead. The days that followed were a blur of silence. Rachel tried calling me a few times, but I never picked up. I knew she was panicking, probably wondering what I was going to do next. I stayed at a hotel, giving myself space to cool down, to think. And while part of me was tempted to forgive her, to believe her apologies, I knew deep down that things could never be the same. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I met with a lawyer the following week, just to explore my options. I didn't know if I was ready to file for divorce yet, but I wanted to be prepared. I wanted to make sure that if things did go that far, I'd have everything I needed in place. The lawyer was understanding, professional, and laid out my choices clearly. It was a sobering conversation, one that made me realize just how much was at stake. Meanwhile, I kept my distance from Rachel, even as she continued to text me, begging for another chance. She'd say she was going to therapy, that she was working on herself, that she was willing to do anything to fix what she'd broken. But the truth was, I didn't know if I even wanted it to be fixed. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. Then, one evening, I got a text from her that stopped me in my tracks. It was short, simple, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened. "I'm moving out. I understand if you don't want me anymore." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. This was the end, I realized. The final unraveling of what had once been our life together. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't go back. Not after everything that had happened. I replied with just one word, "Okay." And that was it. Rachel moved out a few days later, quietly and without drama. There were no more tears, no more desperate pleas. She knew, just as I did, that our relationship had reached its breaking point. And while part of me mourned the loss of what we'd once had, another part of me felt free from the manipulation, the lies, and the betrayal. In the end, Rachel got what she wanted. She taught me a lesson. But it wasn't the one she had planned. It was the lesson of knowing my own worth, of understanding that I didn't need to put up with someone who tried to break me just to feel validated. And that lesson, it was worth more than any revenge.